An odd thing about the music we can listen to when it, just pick any music and you can listen to it. But most of this classical music, and this was actually Baroque. We talk about classical music, but what we mean is Renaissance, Baroque, classical, which is actually a very short period, romantic, and what? Impressionist, I guess. When you think of classical music, any music with an orchestra, I guess, is what we think of it. But it was actually written for one use. This was written for the funeral, and as far as I know, it's not until it was revived later on by some more contemporary composer that they had the music and decided to put on a performance of it. I don't know. I know Bach, his music was for one Sunday, and then that cantata was done. And Felix Mendelssohn revived interest in Bach, and so Bach didn't really become famous till after Felix Mendelssohn started having performances of his work, and everybody says, "Wow, that's really nice." So that also explains, I think, when you're listening to Bach, if you really get into a lot of Bach's music and so on, or Purcell or Handel, they reuse themes over and over again. So especially if you're used to Handel's Messiah, the Alleluia chorus, because that's very popular, right? Themes in that you hear in lots of Handel's music. So he's recycling a lot of his own stuff, and I don't think anyone would have cared back then. One of my favorite composers today is John Williams, and he gets so much criticism from critics that point out that he doesn't write any of his own music. Well, that's false. But what he does do is he takes music from all sources and puts it together to fit a particular movie, to make the mood exactly what the director or the producer wants for that particular scene. So he's a master at knowing which music will be just right for this. Or, in fact, he might be the one who's convinced us that music was just right for that. Who knows? Because he's done what? Anybody know? 180 movies? And that was years ago, so I don't know. I think he's still.
What does he do soundtracks to? Do you know?
Well, Star Wars. All the Star Wars movies. The first 3 Harry Potter movies. The Indiana Jones movies, Channel 10 News, the Olympics theme that has stuck since he wrote that one. It's pretty much been the same theme that they keep using ever since. But Far and Away, Schindler's List. What was that one called? Life of a Geisha? Memoirs of a Geisha. In fact, it pisses me off that he didn't make Memoirs of a Geisha, because he had agreed to do that one. When he was asked to do Harry Potter 4, he couldn't, because he was too busy doing the other one. So at Harry Potter 4 and on, they used different composers, and the lightness and childlike nature of the story changed drastically with movie 4. And I don't know if it was because the music was different or the producer was different or whatever. But this music that I picked is music that I found years ago that was written specifically for the funeral of Queen Mary. She died a few years before William did, but they were co-regents, I guess. So, is that this one? So we get rid of that. If you're curious about the link and want to listen to it, I do have it in my notes right here. Here's links on her and so on. I noticed in looking at these notes that there were a couple things that I didn't mention when we were talking about Spinoza that I usually do. And that's in talking about religious meta-narration or religious narrative, a contemporary who I have on our list of philosophers, if you're curious, if you still haven't picked a philosopher to do your term paper on, is Miroslav Volf. And I do have a link to his one book, Flourishing, which you can look at here. And his basic point, though, is that meta-narration is where we get value from. So if you want to explain the value, you usually have to embed it in the narrative or the meta-narrative that explains why you think that's a valuable thing. And we usually also refer to those narratives as the legitimating narratives of a particular value, right? You heard that expression before? The legitimating narrative. And one of our main concerns today will be social contract theory. And what we'll see is John Locke expands on the social contract theory presented by Thomas Hobbes and gives us an explanation for social contract as the grounds for our government. So if you're going to have a just government, what you need is a social contract among the citizens, right? And that's his explanation for it. That among others, we've got besides Thomas Hobbes, we also have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was influenced by John Locke. And by the way, I don't really like Rousseau. I know he was important for lots of reasons. I know Hegel really got a lot out of him, but Rousseau bothers me. He was in fact, I should point out that Rousseau got started as a composer. I think we get some here, right? So, if you weren't familiar, if you've heard of Rousseau before, he started out as an opera composer, and he was popular. It went over. It was a big hit and all that, but he didn't feel as successful as he wanted to. So he wrote to a friend of his named Voltaire. Probably have heard of Voltaire before. And he asked Voltaire, how can I be more famous? And Voltaire wrote back to him and says, write books that say exactly the opposite of what everybody believes. And lo and behold, he wrote a book called The Social Contract, which basically explored this whole idea that a just state is based on the citizens all agreeing to the contract, the social contract. Totally the opposite of, remember, he's in France, and in France you have absolute monarchy until they cut the head off of their monarch and their queen, who was still eating cake, I believe, at the time. Sorry. And then, by the way, that ended when they cut the head off of Rousseau, who was not Rousseau, Robespierre, sorry, get my R names mixed up. Robespierre is famous for using the guillotine on so many people. It's just irony that it also ended Robespierre's life, so that's kind of fun. It's a different variation on he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, he who lives by the guillotine dies by the guillotine. But Rousseau went on to write books like what's her name? Not Emily. What's the name of the book that he wrote? The student he wrote on education. What's the best kind of education? He writes, no education is the best kind of education. Everybody thinks, having an education is an important thing. He said, no, let the children, kick them out of the house. And if they survive and come back and they start asking you questions, then answer their questions. And that's the best kind of education. Let me find the name of that book. You have to read it if you're studying education still today. Emile. What did I say? Emily? So Emile on education. This focuses on child-centeredness. So the education should be focused on the needs of the child. Let the child ask questions and then you answer the questions. So basically, no education. And in his social contract, the best kind of government was no government. Instead of having a government, government corrupts everything. See, that's just the opposite of what everyone thinks. Because his state of nature, by the way, is a state where everything is just absolutely lovey-dovey. It's an Eden. It's a utopia, a state of nature where everybody's, tra-la-la, having a good time, and everybody gets along, everybody's wonderful. Look at the butterflies, I guess, I don't know. And along comes government and imposes things, restrictions, rules on people, and as a result you end up with corruption, corrupt leaders and tyrants and things of that sort. So the best kind of education is no education. And the best kind of government is no government. And guess what? The French tried it. And it became what was known as the Terror. Because no, it doesn't work. Rousseau put into practice as best as the French could think of it, did not work. So don't go in that direction. But the thing that gets me is, it was just a joke. He was following Voltaire's suggestion in order to become a popular writer. And guess what? He did. He became popular because when you write just the opposite of what's everyone believes to be true.
You say he's insincere in what he was saying?
Absolutely, okay. Absolutely. I mean, you could see in the letters he has with Voltaire where this idea starts from. By the way, there's controversies over his relationship with Voltaire because they call one another horrible names back and forth in the letters that they wrote a lot to one another. And you know what if you've ever met people that yell and say nasty things to one another, but are great friends and can do that because that's the way I interpret those letters. But there are folks that say, see, look, these 50 letters that they wrote back,